Everyone in this town knew one rule: never look down there. But when the rancher broke it, the ground itself reacted, and what came after can't be undone. The warning came to him the way all warnings in Dry Willow did, quietly, like the town itself didn't want to be overheard repeating it. "Don't," old Mara said, her fingers clamping around his wrist with a strength that didn't match her thin arms. Her skin was dry and cold, smelling faintly of sage and lamp oil. "That's forbidden." She stood at the edge of the chapel yard, where the fence leaned away from the land as if even the wood refused to face what lay beyond. Past the last gravestone, the ground dipped sharply into the ravine, a deep scar in the earth that cut through the hills like something had once tried to tear its way out. The grass there grew darker, thicker, bending even when there was no wind. At the brink stood a stone marker half sunk into the soil, smooth and pale, marked with a single carved line that looked less like a symbol and more like a wound. The rancher followed her gaze. He'd lived in Dry Willow long enough to know better than to ask about that place, but long habits die hard. He squinted, adjusting his hat against the lowering sun. "Forbidden by who?" he asked, his voice calm, almost casual. Mara's mouth tightened. For a moment, he thought she might answer. Instead, she released his wrist as if burned, crossed herself with trembling fingers, and backed toward the chapel door. "Some things are kept, not understood," she said. Then she slipped inside and shut the door hard enough to make the bell above it shudder. The sound rang once and died. That should have been the end of it. The rancher went back to his work, mending fence wire and checking the south pasture. But the word followed him. Forbidden. It crept into the rhythm of his hammer, slipped between the hoofbeats of his horse, hummed under the cicadas as dusk settled over the valley. He'd grown up with rules carved into him by land and weather: don't cross a river in flood, don't ride a spooked horse, don't trust a sky that goes green at noon. Those rules made sense. They kept you alive. This one felt different. By the time the town lamps flickered on, casting weak halos of light through the dust, his curiosity had sharpened into something restless and hot. He ate a quiet supper, barely tasting the beans, and listened to the night stretch itself awake. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped and went abruptly silent. He took his lantern and went anyway. The path down into the ravine wasn't marked, but his feet found it as if they'd been there before. The air cooled with each step, thickening until it pressed against his chest. The smell changed too, less sage, more damp stone and something metallic, like blood long dried into the ground. Crickets stopped singing. Even the lantern flame dimmed, guttering low though there was no breeze. At the bottom, the rock wall rose sheer and black, threaded through with roots as thick as his arm. Set into the stone was the thing the town pretended not to know. A door. It didn't belong there. No hinges showed, no frame cut clean. It looked grown rather than built, wood darkened with age, surface scarred by time and touch. At its center was a smooth circular shape, polished pale against the black, reflecting the lantern light with a dull sheen. "Don't," he muttered to himself, the sound swallowed by the ravine. His heart hammered, not with fear exactly, but with the strange certainty that he had reached the edge of something that did not care whether he crossed it. He leaned closer. The circle was not stone. It was an eye, not a human one, but something old and wrong, its surface glassy and pale, the pupil stretched wide. In its reflection, his face looked warped, pulled long and thin as if the eye saw him through water. He stumbled back, boots scraping on loose gravel, breath tearing from his lungs. The eye blinked. The door exhaled. That was the moment he should have run. Every instinct he had screamed at him to turn, to climb, to forget he'd ever come here. Instead, his hand rose on its own, fingers splayed, and pressed flat against the smooth surface. The rock shuddered under his palm. Roots creaked and tightened, grinding against stone. With a sound like a deep breath finally let go after centuries of holding it in, the door opened inward. Darkness spilled out. Not empty darkness, but layered and heavy, carrying the smell of dust, cold water, and years pressed together. The lantern flame stretched toward it, thinning, then steadied as if caught. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. The chamber beyond was wider than the ravine should have allowed, its ceiling lost in shadow. Symbols crawled across the walls, carved deep into the stone. When he tried to focus on them, they seemed to shift, writhing just at the edge of sight. His head throbbed, pressure building behind his eyes. At the center stood a stone table. Something lay on it, wrapped in cloth the color of old bone, edges frayed and stained by time. He approached slowly, each step echoing too loudly in the stillness. As he reached out, his fingers brushed the cloth, and a jolt ran up his arm, not pain, but memory. He saw dry willow before it was dry willow. He saw frightened men and women standing shoulder to shoulder along the ravine, their faces set with grim resolve. He felt the weight of something heavy in his hand, heard a deep, resonant sound roll out over the hills, pressing down on something beneath the earth, forcing it back. The cloth fell away. A bell lay on the stone, larger and heavier than any chapel bell, its surface etched with the same shifting symbols. A leather strap threaded through its crown, worn soft by countless hands. Understanding settled over him like a net. This was it. Not the chapel, not the laws spoken aloud. This was what the town had been built around. A duty passed down, never questioned, never explained. Ring the bell. Hold the line. Keep what lay below from rising. The borrowed memory urged him gently, insistently. Ring it. His hands closed around the bell. Something in him rebelled. All his life, he had been told where to stand, what not to touch, how far to go and no further. The land had demanded respect, yes, but it had never asked for blind obedience. This was fear made into tradition, silence hardened into law. What if it's a lie? He whispered, his voice echoing strangely. What if you've been ringing it just because you were told to? The symbols along the walls flared, casting the chamber in harsh, flickering light. The pressure in his head intensified, a wordless warning. He lifted the bell. Instead of swinging it, he brought it down hard against the stone table. The sound was not a ring. It was a crack, sharp, violent, final. The bell split, a fracture racing along its side. The symbols guttered and went dark. Deep beneath his feet, something shifted, like a great weight being dragged across stone. The ground trembled. The door burst open, cold air rushing in, carrying distant shouts. Torches flared at the top of the ravine, their light slicing down into the darkness. The town had noticed. The town always noticed. He staggered out, clutching the broken bell, as another tremor rippled through the earth. At the ravine's edge, the stone marker split in two, the ground opening with a sound like tearing cloth. From the fissure rose a wind that smelled of old water and endings. Mara stood among the others. Hair loose, eyes wild with terror. What did you do? She cried, her voice breaking. The rancher looked down at the bell in his hands. Its surface was dull now, ordinary metal split and useless. He thought of fences and horses, of open land and choices made under wide skies. I looked, he said hoarsely. And I chose. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the tremors eased. The fissure sealed itself with a wet, grinding sound. The ravine fell silent, the oppressive air lifting just enough to breathe. Slowly, the townsfolk realized what that meant. The forbidden thing wasn't destroyed. It wasn't banished. It was no longer bound. And as the rancher met their frightened gazes, he understood the true unthinkable act wasn't breaking the bell. It was teaching whatever lay beneath dry willow that the rules could be broken, and that someone, at last, had dared to listen.